The collective obsession with visible effort, sweat, and the passage of time serves only to mask a more clinical reality that most will never permit themselves to see. It is a common delusion to believe that the external world responds to the intensity of one's struggle or the hours sacrificed at the altar of productivity. In truth, reality is entirely indifferent to movement that lacks a specific internal coordinates. It functions as a mirror, not a judge, reflecting precise geometric arrangement of one's silent identity. Those who find themselves perpetually exhausted by the pursuit of gain are often merely witnessing the mathematical consequence of a misaligned center of gravity, unaware that their very exertion is the signal that maintains their current state of lack. The quiet frustration that lingers in the background of life, the sense that a glass wall exists between current circumstances and a different, more fluid existence, is not a sign of bad luck or insufficient intelligence. It is the evidence of an invisible coherence at work, a law that ensures external environment never fluctuates far from the internal position one occupies. When the internal state is one of seeking, the world must, by necessity, provide reasons to continue seeking, thereby ensuring that the object of desire remains precisely out of reach. This is a mechanism of the inverted pursuit, where the act of chasing becomes a very wall that prevents the capture, solidifying the distance between what is held and what is merely wanted. To move through the world with an internal position of needing is to broadcast a frequency that the architecture reality is designed to amplify. Most individuals operate as if they are separate from their results, failing to realize that their financial standing is simply the physical shadow cast by a much deeper, more rigid mental posture. If the center of gravity is anchored in the confirmation of what is missing, no amount of external strategy or intellectual labor can alter the trajectory of the outcome. The world does not get what is asked for. It mirrors what is already accepted as the baseline of being, functioning with the cold, automatic precision of physical constant. As the day dissolves and the conscious mind prepares to withdraw, a specific window of vulnerability opens where the internal calibration for the following cycle is finalized. It is in these moments of silence, just before the threshold of sleep, that most people unknowingly sabotage their entire field of possibility by entertaining a specific orientation of thought. This thought acts as a poison to the internal center of gravity, a silent distortion that realigns the entire mechanism of the next day toward the maintenance of the status quo. To hold this thought at the moment of ego dissolution is to instruct the fabric of reality to replicate the very limitations one claims to want to escape, ensuring that the morning brings only more of the same friction. The perception that time has been lost or that opportunities have been missed is a fundamental misunderstanding of the process. Time has simply been used to perfectly execute a state that could never have yielded a different harvest. You are not witnessing a failure of talent or discipline, but the flawless operation of a mental law that has been responding to your internal signal with absolute fidelity. To remain in this loop is to accept an inevitable cost, a systematic drainage of potential that occurs as long as the internal incoherence remains unaddressed. There is no middle ground. Either the internal position is recalibrated to match the desired reality, or the reality will continue to ruthlessly reflect the current, invisible distortion. The persistent observer notices a peculiar friction in the fabric of modern existence, a dissonance that the standard narratives of success refuse to acknowledge. There exists a vast population of individuals who adhere to every prescribed rule of advancement. They possess the certifications, they maintain the discipline, and they expend energy until their vital reserves are depleted. Yet their economic reality remains stagnant or regresses. This is not a failure of the system the way it is commonly understood, nor is it a lack of merit or intellect. It is the first evidence of a deeper, silent law that dictates that external output is entirely decoupled from internal worth. The exhaustion they feel is not the byproduct of progress, but the friction caused by moving against a gravitational current they cannot see, believing that the harder they push, the more the world must yield to their demands. This struggle is often masked by a culture that glorifies the grind, yet the results tell a much colder story of repetition and stagnation. One might see a person who has studied every market trend, mastered every technical skill, and yet finds themselves perpetually sidelined by unforeseen circumstances or subtle shifts in the environment. This is the hallmark of a structural misalignment, where the individual is attempting to build a skyscraper on a foundation of shifting sand. They are engaged in a game where the rules they have been taught are merely decoys, designed to keep the mind occupied with the mechanics of effort, while the actual outcome is decided by a much more fundamental arrangement of internal space. The realization begins to dawn that perhaps the obstacle was never the lack of opportunity, but the presence of an internal resistance that makes opportunity invisible or repels it entirely. When one examines the mechanics of action, it becomes clear that the physical deed is merely the terminal point of a much longer sequence of internal events. Every movement made in the pursuit of wealth carries with it the specific weight and scent of the state from which it originated. If the impulse to work is born from a frantic need to escape a condition of insufficiency, the work itself becomes an emissary of that insufficiency. The reality does not respond to the movement of the hands. It responds to the gravity of the intent. Consequently, the individual who works 12 hours a day from a position of deep-seated fear is effectively tattooing that fear into the very fabric of their results, ensuring that every dollar earned carries the same instability as the thought that chased it. This invisible field of causation operates regardless of one's awareness or consent, functioning with the same impartiality as the law of thermodynamics. To the uninitiated, it looks like bad luck or a series of unfortunate coincidences, but to the one who begins to see the pattern, it is revealed as a perfect response. There is no such thing as a random financial failure. There is only the manifestation of an internal state that could not sustain a different outcome. The action taken in a state of lack is not a bridge to abundance. It is a reinforcement of the void. This paradox is a reason why many who win wealth through chance often lose it with remarkable speed, as their internal gravity quickly reasserts the original order of their existence. The question then arises, if effort is not the primary driver of outcome, what is the nature of the force that organizes the external world? It is the silent order of the internal identity, the unwavering assumption of one's place within the hierarchy of existence. Most people are operating under a seeking identity, which is a state of perpetual chasing. To seek is to declare, with every fiber of one's being, that the object of the search is currently absent. This declaration is a powerful command to the architecture of reality, which has no choice but to provide a consistent experience of that absence. Wealth, when viewed as something to be attained through the exertion of force, remains perpetually on the horizon, retreating at the exact same pace as the pursuer's advance. The paradox of the seeker is perhaps the most cruel of all mental traps, for it rewards a very behavior that ensures failure. The more intensely one pursues a destination, the more they reinforce the distance between themselves and that point, creating a feedback loop of effort and disappointment. It is a game designed to be lost by those who play it with the most fervor, for their fervor is a primary evidence of their conviction that they do not already possess the center of gravity they seek. This is an inverted pursuit, where the act of wanting something becomes a very wall that prevents its arrival. The world is not withholding the result. It is simply being faithful to the signal of wanting that the individual is broadcasting. Consider the sensation of being in a flow state, where results seem to gravitate toward the individual with minimal intervention. This is not a lucky streak, but a moment of temporary coherence where the internal state and the external field are in alignment. Conversely, when a person is trying too hard, they are introducing a massive amount of noise into the system. This noise manifests as resistance. Deals fall through, communication breaks down, and simple tasks become insurmountable hurdles. This is a field closing itself off to the force of the ego. The field responds to presence, not to pressure. It yields to the center of gravity that is already fixed, not to the one that is desperately trying to find its footing. This leads to the realization that the world we perceive as solid and external is actually a fluid reflection of a much deeper, more rigid mental posture. If the center of gravity is anchored in the confirmation of what is missing, no amount of external strategy or intellectual labor can alter the trajectory of the outcome. The world does not give what is asked for. It mirrors what is already accepted as the baseline of being. Most individuals spend their entire lives asking for things they have already decided. Internally, they do not have the right to occupy. This internal contradiction creates a static that prevents any meaningful change from taking root, leaving the individual to wonder why their prayers, affirmations, and hard work seem to fall on deaf ears. The invisible field in which we operate is not a neutral space, but a highly sensitive feedback mechanism that operates with a cold, mathematical precision. It does not recognize hard work as a currency. It only recognizes coherence. When a person's internal identity is fractured, believing in the possibility of wealth while simultaneously vibrating with the anxiety of its absence, the field receives a distorted signal. The result is a reality characterized by near misses and a persistent sense of being almost there but never quite arriving. This is the silent order of things, where the external world acts as a mirror that refuses to show a different reflection until the object standing before it has fundamentally altered its internal composition. Why is it that two people can perform the exact same actions, follow the same business plan, and inhabit the same market, yet one flourishes while the other falters? The difference is never found in the what or the how, but in the where from which the action is initiated. One is acting from a center of gravity that assumes success as a natural byproduct of existence, while the other is acting as an intruder, trying to steal a result from a world they feel is inherently hostile or scarce. The intruder is always caught by the law of mental gravity, which pulls them back to the level of their true internal standing. This is not a matter of merit. It is a matter of structural integrity. Most people live their lives in a state of constant reaction, attempting to fix a reflection in the mirror, without ever addressing the source of the image. They move from one strategy to another, one job to another, one investment to another, yet they carry the same internal gravity with them into every new endeavor. This gravity acts as a structural limit, a ceiling that no amount of effort can penetrate because it is built into the very foundation of their self-perception. The discomfort one feels when looking at their financial standing is not a call to work harder. It is a friction of an internal state that is trying to tell them they are operating under a set of assumptions that make wealth impossible. To change a result, one must first cease the attempt to change the result. This sounds like a riddle, but it is a fundamental law of the invisible field. As long as the focus is on the missing wealth, the internal state remains one of lack. The more one tries to solve the problem of poverty, the more one solidifies the identity of being a person who has a problem with poverty. The problem and the person become one and the same, locked in a dance of mutual reinforcement. The only way to break the cycle is to withdraw the attention from reflection and turn it toward the source, recognizing that the external world has no power of its own. It is merely a shadow cast by the internal light. The architecture of reality is such that it always seeks the path of least resistance to fulfill the dominant internal state. If the dominant state is one of struggle, reality will find or create obstacles to ensure that struggle remains the primary experience. If the dominant state is one of quiet, unwavering certainty, reality will rearrange itself, often in ways that seem miraculous or coincidental, to match that certainty. This is the automatic response of life, a mechanism that does not require belief or effort to function. It is simply the way the field organizes information into form. The difficulty lies not in the organization itself, but in the individual's inability to maintain a coherent internal signal. This incoherence is most prevalent during the transition between states of activity and states of rest. Throughout the day, the conscious mind is busy with the logistics of survival, but as the sun sets and the body slows, the deeper layers of the mind begin to surface. It is here in the quietude of the evening that the most significant work of calibration occurs. Most people use this time to rehearse their grievances, to worry about the future, or to dwell on the inadequacies of the day. By doing so, they are effectively programming the code for the following day's reality, ensuring that the same patterns of resistance and lack are replicated with perfect fidelity. The weight of these thoughts is often unnoticed because they have become the background noise of existence. A person may think they are simply being realistic by worrying about their debts before they sleep, but in the language of the mental law, they are actually placing an order for more debt. Reality does not distinguish between a worry and a wish. It only recognizes the intensity and consistency of the internal focus. To hold a thought of lack at the moment of ego dissolution is to anchor oneself to that lack with a strength that no amount of daytime effort can overcome. It is a silent sabotage that keeps the wheel of struggle turning year after year. As the consciousness begins to drift toward the state of sleep, the barriers between the perceived self and the fundamental field begin to thin. This is the threshold of the non-return, the moment when the blueprint for the coming cycle is etched into the subconscious, away from the noise of the day's activities. The mind at this stage is highly receptive, functioning like a camera lens that is being left open for a long exposure. Whatever image is held in the mind during this transition is what will be burned into the fabric of the next day's experience. Most people enter this state while carrying the heavy, jagged thoughts of their struggles, effectively ordering a repeat performance for the following cycle. There is one specific orientation of thought, a subtle, pervasive mental posture that acts as a total block to the flow of wealth. It is the thought that the current reality is true and the desired reality is false or yet to come. This thought creates a binary of here versus there, which the mind interprets as a permanent gap. When you think this thought before sleep, you are instructing your internal center of gravity to remain exactly where it is, because you have validated the current state of lack as the ultimate truth of your existence. You have effectively closed the door to any new information or any new arrangement of the field, because you have already decided what is real. This thought is not always a sentence. It is often a feeling of heaviness, a sigh of resignation, or a silent calculation of what is missing. It is the mental act of looking at the bank account of mind and seeing a zero. By performing this audit every night, the individual ensures that the audit will remain accurate. They are practicing the presence of absence. This is a game of the wrong gravity, where the person believes they are being responsible by acknowledging their problems, but they are actually acting as the architect of their own imprisonment. They are reinforcing the non-wealth identity at the very moment when the mind is most capable of rewriting its own history. The field of reality does not have a memory. It only has a now. However, the human mind is obsessed with memory and uses it to project the future. When a person lies down to sleep and reviews their day as a series of failures or frustrations, they are telling the field that the now of tomorrow must be a continuation of the now of today. They are using their creative power to maintain a stagnant pond rather than a flowing river. This is a silent order that ensures the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Not because of systemic conspiracy, but because of the structural law of mental coherence. One group is rehearsing wealth, while the other is rehearsing its departure. The discomfort that arises from this realization is necessary. It is the friction of the soul recognizing that it has been complicit in its own limitation. It is not a matter of lack of merit or lack of opportunity. It has always been a matter of misalignment. You have been operating under a state that could never have yielded a different harvest, no matter how hard you worked or how much you studied. The realization that you are the source of the resistance is the first step toward the dissolution of that resistance, but is a path that requires the abandonment of the most cherished delusion of all, the belief that the external world is in control. To inhabit a new economic reality, one must first inhabit the internal position that makes that reality inevitable. This is not a process of becoming rich, but of recognizing the internal state that is rich. Any thought that contradicts the state, any thought that suggests wealth is coming soon or hard to get, is a thought that must never be entertained at the threshold of sleep. These thoughts are the anchors of the old identity, the weights that pull the center of gravity back into the depths of lack. The mind must be clear of the debris of the day's struggles, not through effort, but through a total withdrawal of the importance assigned to them. The internal field does not care about your justifications for feeling poor. It does not care that your car broke down, that your taxes are high, or that you were passed over for promotion. It only cares about the signal you are sending right now. If the signal is one of frustration with lack, the response will be more reasons for frustration. This is the cold, automatic precision of life. Most people find this offensive because it removes the comfort of victimhood and places the burden of causation squarely on their own internal posture. Yet, in this burden lies the only true freedom. For if you are the one creating the resistance, you are the only one who can remove it. The transition to sleep is the most sacred time for this removal. It is the only time when the analytical, defensive ego is forced to step aside. If you can enter that state without the baggage of the seeker, without the frantic energy of the worker, and without the heavy thought of needing, you begin to shift the very geometry of your existence. You are no longer chasing the reflection. You are beginning to change the object in front of the mirror. This is a silent work that no one sees, the work that occurs in the space between breaths, where the identity of the next day is decided. The tragedy of the common man is that he spends his days trying to change his life, and his nights confirming why it cannot change. He is a house divided against itself, a signal that is constantly canceling itself out. To reach the state of wealth, the internal signal must be unopposed. there can be no but, or if, or when. There can only be the quiet, stable coherence of a center of gravity that has already arrived. Anything else is just more noise, more friction, and more of the same results. The door to a different life is always open, but most people are too busy looking at the lock to notice that the key has been in their hand the entire time. The perception that you have lost time or missed your chance is merely another thought of lack designed to keep you anchored. Time is a construct that the internal field does not recognize. It only recognizes a state of being. You could spend 40 years in a state of lack and change it in a single moment of total internal alignment. The field is ready to respond instantly, but it is waiting for a signal that is not constantly being retracted by doubt and worry. The internal coherence required for wealth is not a matter of intensity, but a consistency. It is the steady, quiet assumption that becomes the very atmosphere of your mind. The final layer of this understanding is the most difficult to accept. The world you see around you is not the cause of your thoughts, but the effect of them. When you lie in bed and look at your room, or think about your bank balance, you are looking at the past. You are looking at the physical evidence of thoughts you held yesterday, last month, and last year. To react to these things as if they're the ultimate truth of your now is to trap yourself in a loop of historical replication. You are essentially using the past to create the future, ensuring that nothing ever truly changes. The thought that must be avoided is the thought that gives the past authority over the present. This is why the specific thought we are discussing is so toxic. It is the ultimate validator of the past. It is a thought that says, I am this person in this situation with these problems. By thinking this before sleep, you are renewing your contract with your current limitations. You are signing your name to the same old life for another 24 hours. The wealthy mind, by contrast, does not look at the past for evidence of what is possible. It looks at the internal center of gravity. It understands that the external world is always catching up to the internal state, and therefore, the current lack is merely a fading shadow that has no power to dictate the next moment. The gravity of your mind is the only thing that determines which opportunities you see and which ones you miss. A mind anchored in wealth will see a way to grow in a crisis, while a mind anchored in lack will see a way to fail in a boom. The how is a byproduct of the where. If you are in the right internal position, the how will find you, often through avenues you could never have planned with your conscious intellect. This is a luck that people talk about, the automatic response to reality that has been given a clear, coherent command. It is not magic. It is a natural result of a field that has no choice but to organize itself around the strongest center of gravity. As you move closer to the edge of sleep, the opportunity for this recalibration becomes absolute. The world of form begins to dissolve, and you are left with only the raw material of your own consciousness. This is where the true wealth is built, not in the boardrooms of the markets, but in the silent, formless space where you decide who you are. If you carry the thought of being a striver or a seeker into this space, you will return to world form as a striver and a seeker. But if you can drop those identities and occupy the center of gravity of the one who has, the field will have no choice but to begin the process of physical manifestation. The transition you are seeking is not one of effort, but of surrender. Surrendering the need to struggle, the need to worry, and the need to be right about your current limitations. The silence of the night is the mirror of the silence of the field. If you can meet that silence with a coherent internal signal, the friction of your life will begin to vanish, and the resistance of the world will turn into a tailwind. The only thing standing in the way is the persistent habit of thinking the one thought that confirms your absence. Once a thought is removed, the structural law of the mind will do the rest, and the world will finally begin to reflect the wealth that has always been your true internal coordinates. The realization that one has been running in the wrong direction does not come as a sudden shock, but as a slow, cooling sensation in the marrow. For years, the effort was focused on the horizon, believing that wealth was a distant point to be reached through sheer velocity and the endurance of pain. Yet, the horizon is a mathematical construct that recedes at the exact speed of the pursuer. The exhaustion you feel is the weight of an invisible geometry that was never designed to reward your struggle, but only to mirror your position. To stand still now is not an act of surrender, but the first moment of true positioning, where the frantic energy of the seeker is finally replaced by the heavy, silent gravity of the one who is already centered. You have spent a lifetime operating under a set of unspoken rules that govern your every success and failure with cold, mechanical precision. This internal architecture was built in the dark, during the quiet moments when you thought you were merely resting, but were actually reinforcing the walls of your own limitation. The friction you once attributed to bad luck or a difficult world is now revealed as the sound of your own internal gears grinding against the truth of your existence. There is a specific dignity in recognizing that the problem was never your capacity to work, but the frequency of the signal you sent before the work ever began. The rules have not changed. Your awareness of them has simply made the old way of living impossible to sustain without a localized ache of incoherence. As you approach the threshold of sleep tonight, the space between your thoughts will feel different, more expansive, and perhaps more demanding. The old habit of rehearsing your needs and auditing your debts will now feel like a foreign object in the mind, a jagged stone in a stream that is trying to find its way to the sea. To entertain the thought of absence now would be to knowingly poison the well from which your tomorrow must drink. This internal friction is the most honest guide you have ever possessed. It is a signal that the old identity is being shed and that the cost of returning to the state of needing has become too high for the soul to pay. The contrast between the person who wants and the person who is not found in their actions, but in the quality of their silence. Need is loud, frantic, and perpetually hungry, while certainty is a quiet, immovable presence that requires no defense and no explanation. The mirror of reality is currently adjusting itself to this new stillness, shifting the field to accommodate a center of gravity that no longer fluctuates with the anxieties of the day. You are beginning to understand that wealth is not a trophy to be captured, but an atmosphere to be inhabited. The shift is subtle, like a tide turning in the middle of the night, invisible to the eye, but absolute in its power to rearrange the entire shoreline. This resonance you feel is the sound of a structural alignment that has been waiting for your recognition to become active. It is the beginning of a process that does not require your permission to continue, only your willingness to remain in the position that has been reclaimed. If the depth of this understanding feels like a door that has finally clicked shut behind you, it is because you have crossed a boundary from which there is no return to the previous delusion. Those who recognize this internal frequency are already moving toward a different expression of life, one where the answer to their existence is provided by the coherence of their state. If you are ready to stabilize this new gravity, the path to further alignment is the only logical step remaining. The mirror never lies, but it only shows what stands before it.